The moment Maya Brooks stepped into the first-class cabin of Stellar Airways, the atmosphere shifted. The spacious leather seats, crystal glasses filled with champagne, and hushed conversations came to a standstill. All eyes turned to her, not in admiration, but in judgment. At 35, Maya stood with quiet confidence in a tasteful navy blue dress and flats, her only jewelry a silver watch gifted by her husband. But in a cabin filled with designer heels and luxury handbags, she didn't look like someone who belonged. The lead flight attendant, Karen Reynolds, approached her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am, this section is for first-class passengers only," she said, her tone more accusation than information. Maya politely extended her boarding pass, but Karen barely concealed her suspicion, holding the ticket like it might soil her manicured hands. She scrutinized it before announcing, "There must be a mistake." Whispers stirred. A businessman in a sharp suit looked up from his tablet, smirking. "Economy's getting bold these days," he said, loud enough for Maya to hear. A woman with diamonds the size of marbles laughed softly and muttered, "Next, she'll say her husband owns the airline." No one asked Maya why she was there. No one gave her the benefit of the doubt. They only saw her appearance, a modest woman of color in a space they believed was reserved for the ultra-elite. The unspoken message was clear: you don't look like us, so you don't belong here. What they didn't know was that Maya had once worked as a top flight attendant on this very airline, or that her husband, Caleb Vaughn, was not just wealthy, but the majority shareholder of Stellar Airways. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What did was the sting of being judged, excluded, and diminished, based solely on appearances. It was a stark reminder that in many places, even today, perception still trumps truth. Maya Brooks had barely stepped into the first-class cabin when she encountered the first wave of silent disapproval. But the words that followed from the flight crew stung more than any glance ever could. Karen Reynolds, the head flight attendant, approached with an air of superiority, polished from years of unchecked authority. Her tight bun, spotless navy uniform adorned with golden stripes, and blindingly white teeth weren't just signs of professionalism, they had become symbols of control, and today, of judgment. Karen's voice sliced through the cabin like ice. "This section is for first-class passengers only," she said, scanning Maya from head to toe. Her gaze wasn't one of confusion, it was challenge. Maya, unfazed, handed over her boarding pass, but Karen held it like a contaminated napkin, her manicured nails gleaming under the LED cabin lights. "There must be some kind of error," she said flatly, flipping the ticket over several times for effect. Without asking Maya a single question, Karen immediately suggested she wait in the back of the plane, adding, "You'll be more comfortable there," with a tone so drenched in false sympathy it bordered on cruelty. That single word, comfortable, carried all the weight of dismissal. It wasn't about seating or class, it was about control, and Maya knew it. Around her, murmurs grew. A man lowered his designer reading glasses to get a better look. A pair of passengers in matching Versace whispered as they glanced at her modest dress. No one questioned Karen, not because she was right, but because she said what they were already thinking. What made it worse was the betrayal Maya felt. She had once worn the same uniform, taken the same oaths of service, but standing in front of Karen, she was no longer a professional. Just a woman who had wandered into the wrong part of the sky. The crew's tone, body language, and assumptions revealed a deeper truth. They weren't protecting luxury, they were protecting exclusion. And they had made Maya their target. Just as the tension in the first-class cabin reached a boiling point, the aircraft door opened with a quiet hiss, followed by a shift in atmosphere so sudden it felt physical. Standing in the doorway was Caleb Vaughn, 6'2", dressed in a tailored navy blue Tom Ford suit that clung to his broad shoulders with understated elegance. His silver-streaked hair was swept back in classic executive style, and a glint from the sleek timepiece on his wrist caught the cabin lights like a quiet warning. He didn't rush. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. As he walked down the aisle with calm authority, passengers instinctively leaned back in their seats, giving him space without being told. His steel mule eyes scanned the cabin methodically until they landed on Maya Brooks, his wife, standing awkwardly, surrounded by staff who had all but accused her of trespassing. His jaw tightened just slightly, a telltale sign of restrained fury for those who knew him well. "That's my wife's seat," Caleb said, his voice low and even, yet it seemed to echo across the plush cabin walls. In an instant, the expressions on the flight attendants' faces shifted from smug certainty to panic. Karen Reynolds, moments earlier brimming with authority, now looked like a student caught cheating on an exam. The whispers began immediately. "Caleb Vaughn? The airline owner?" Phones came out, postures straightened, apologies hovered on lips too stunned to speak, but Caleb remained composed. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, his presence alone dismantled the entire dynamic that had humiliated Maya. Without needing to shout, he flipped the script entirely. In just a few strides, Caleb Vaughn reminded the cabin that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It enters quietly, stands tall, and speaks with purpose, and when it defends the dignity of someone unjustly wronged, it becomes unforgettable. Caleb Vaughn didn't need to raise his voice to make the entire cabin listen. As he stood beside his wife, Maya Brooks, one hand gently resting on the small of her back, the atmosphere shifted from arrogance to awkward silence. He looked directly at the cabin manager and lead flight attendant, his gaze steady, his voice calm, but every syllable hit like a gavel. "Is there a reason," he asked slowly, "that my wife was questioned so aggressively while holding a valid first-class ticket?" The room seemed to shrink around his words. Karen Reynolds, who had moments earlier tried to escort Maya to economy, now stood frozen, her crisp uniform suddenly feeling like the manager stammered, offering vague excuses about policy and protocol. But Caleb, whose influence shaped the very policies they referenced, cut through it with surgical precision. "She once led this crew," he continued, his tone sharp but composed. "Before you knew her as a passenger, she was the youngest head flight attendant in this airline's history. She's more familiar with emergency protocol, service standards, and customer care than anyone currently on staff. And yet, she was treated as if she didn't belong." A hush fell over the cabin as Caleb let the silence do the rest. The same passengers who had whispered doubts now sat awkwardly, their eyes downcast, their earlier assumptions exposed. Caleb wasn't just defending Maya, he was indicting a system of quiet discrimination with nothing more than facts and composure. Then came the final blow. "I've already emailed the board," he said without fanfare. "Every employee at Stellar Airways will undergo updated anti-discrimination training. And Ms. Reynolds," he added, turning toward the pale-faced flight attendant, "you'll be the first to participate." He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. But his words carried the unmistakable weight of someone who didn't just own a seat on the plane, but the entire airline. And in that moment, justice didn't roar. It spoke clearly, calmly, and made itself heard. What began as a humiliating moment for Maya Brooks soon transformed into something far more powerful than anyone could have predicted. As the embarrassment of being publicly questioned for her right to sit in first class slowly gave way to clarity, Maya stood taller. Not just because her husband, Caleb Vaughn, had stepped in, but because of what came next. In front of a stunned cabin, Caleb turned the incident into a teachable moment, not only for the staff, but for the company itself. After firmly addressing the behavior of the flight crew and announcing the implementation of mandatory anti-discrimination training, Caleb did something no one saw coming. "We've been looking to fill the role of Director of Customer Experience," he said, his tone shifting from firm to thoughtful. "And after what I witnessed today, there's no one more qualified than Maya." The shock on her face was genuine. Maya had never asked for a title or expected special treatment, especially not from her husband. But this wasn't a handout. It was recognition. Years ago, she had risen through the ranks to become Stellar Airways' youngest lead flight attendant. She knew the airline from the ground up, and today she had experienced firsthand what needed to change. The offer wasn't just a gesture, it was a statement. Caleb wasn't simply restoring her dignity. He was inviting her to help reshape the very culture that had tried to diminish it. By placing her in a leadership role, he made it clear. Maya's experience, both professional and personal, made her the perfect person to lead change. In front of the same passengers who had silently judged her, Maya became more than just a misunderstood woman in the wrong seat. She became a symbol of transformation. What started as discrimination became a catalyst for reform. And for Maya Brooks, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where her voice wouldn't just be heard, but would help lead the way forward. For Maya Brooks, the most powerful part of the ordeal wasn't when her husband defended her or even when the airline staff realized their mistake. It was what happened afterward, in the quiet moments on the balcony of their resort suite, with the sun dipping below the Pacific horizon. As the golden light reflected off the waves and the soft clink of wine glasses echoed between them, Maya finally spoke the truth she had held close for years. "I've spent so long trying to be seen as my own person," she said softly. "Not just your wife, not the woman behind the billionaire, just me." Caleb Vaughn didn't hesitate. He reminded her, gently but firmly, that everything she had accomplished was because of who she was, not who she married. Her leadership at the charity gala, her past as the youngest lead flight attendant in Stellar Airways history, and her unwavering composure in the face of public humiliation, all of it had been hers alone. And now, the role of Director of Customer Experience was not a gift. It was a rightful acknowledgement of her expertise. This wasn't just about status. It was about self-respect, about reclaiming one's identity in a world that often tries to define people by their titles, clothes, or last names. For Maya, it was a reminder that dignity is not granted by others, it's owned from within, and when you refuse to shrink for anyone's comfort, that's when real respect begins. Her story isn't rare. All across America, people, especially women of color, face assumptions that question their worth before they ever speak. But Maya's experience serves as a powerful reminder. Your value isn't up for debate. Whether you walk into a boardroom or board a plane, you deserve to be recognized, not for who you know, but for who you are. And sometimes, the greatest triumph is not in proving others wrong, but in never letting them make you doubt yourself in the first place. As Caleb Vaughn calmly revealed the truth about Maya Brooks, her past as a top flight attendant, her accomplishments, and her rightful place in Seat 2A, the silence in the first-class cabin grew thick with discomfort. The same passengers who had whispered, snickered, and questioned her presence now sat frozen in their plush leather seats, their earlier smugness replaced by something far less comfortable: shame. The woman with the oversized diamond necklace, who had once laughed condescendingly, now stared at the in-flight magazine as if it might swallow her whole. The businessman who'd grumbled about delays suddenly found the stitching on his briefcase fascinating. Even Karen Reynolds, the lead flight attendant whose tone had dripped with superiority, stood awkwardly near the galley, her spine no longer rigid, her face drained of color. But it wasn't just fear of Caleb's authority that changed them, it was the mirror he had held up. Without raising his voice, he had exposed how quickly they had judged a woman not based on fact, but on fabric and assumptions. It was a subtle, necessary reckoning. Throughout the remainder of the flight, the energy shifted. Karen approached Maya with visible effort, her apologies polite but hollow. Other passengers offered nods, polite smiles, small gestures that acknowledged, however late, their missteps. No one said it outright, but the message was clear: they had misjudged her, and they knew it. For Maya, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space with grace. She didn't gloat or demand apologies. Her dignity had never left. It had only been momentarily ignored, and now, with the truth out in the open, those who had once looked down on her were left to sit with their own reflections, and hopefully, learn from them. That evening, as the sun melted into the Pacific Ocean and painted the sky in shades of amber and lavender, Maya Brooks and Caleb Vaughn sat together on the private balcony of their beachfront resort suite. The tension of the day had faded, replaced by the gentle rhythm of waves and the soft clinking of their wine glasses. For the first time since the flight, Maya allowed herself to exhale, not just physically, but emotionally. "This wasn't the reunion I had planned," Caleb admitted with a small smile, his voice low and warm. "I wanted to surprise you with a candlelit dinner, maybe a dance under the stars." Maya smiled, her eyes reflecting the horizon. "You certainly surprised me," she said, her tone light but thoughtful. The events on the plane still lingered in her mind, not as trauma but as clarity. What had started as humiliation had evolved into something far greater, a moment of truth not just for others, but for herself. She looked at Caleb, her voice steady. "For a long time I tried not to lean on your name. I wanted to prove I was more than just your wife." Caleb took her hand gently. "And you did. You always have." In that quiet moment, Maya realized she didn't have to choose between independence and partnership. She could have both. The new role he had offered wasn't charity. It was acknowledgement. It was a space she had earned. As the final rays of sunlight danced on the waves below, Maya felt something rare and grounding: peace. The kind that comes not from vindication, but from being seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are. And with that peace came hope. Not just for herself, but for the future she was about to help build. One of the most powerful lessons in Maya Brooks' story is that dignity and self-worth are not dependent on how others see us, but on how we carry ourselves in the face of judgment. In a world that often makes assumptions based on appearance, status, or background, this story reminds us that true class is found in quiet strength, not loud labels. Many older adults have faced moments where they were overlooked, underestimated, or judged unfairly. But like Maya, it's not always the loudest reaction that commands respect. It's the grace with which we stand firm in our truth. It also reminds us that love, real love, sees and honors the whole person. Caleb's unwavering support wasn't about saving Maya, but about recognizing her value and creating space for her to shine on her own terms. Whether in family, friendships, or community, our ability to uplift others with dignity is a gift. And perhaps most importantly, this story teaches that every injustice is also an opportunity for reflection, reform, and renewal. No matter our age, it's never too late to challenge harmful norms and shape a better, more respectful world, one grounded in empathy, humility, and the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with fairness.